When the young boy stood up to ask his question, the room fell silent. It was one of those moments where time seemed to pause, where everyone could feel something important was about to happen. The boy, no older than 10, clutched the microphone. With both hands, his small fingers wrapped around it tightly. His voice, though young, carried a weight far beyond his years. "Mr. President," he began, his eyes locked on Donald Trump, who sat on stage listening intently. "Do you think God is real? And does he love us?" A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people smiled at the innocence of the question, while others exchanged glances, perhaps wondering how Trump would respond. This wasn't a typical political question. It wasn't about policy, taxes, or the economy. It was deeper, more profound. Trump leaned forward, his expression softening. He took a moment before answering, as if carefully choosing his words. Then he spoke, his voice steady but touched with emotion. "That's a beautiful question," he said, nodding slightly. "A really beautiful question?" He looked out at the audience, then back at the boy. "You know, when I was your age, I had a lot of questions about God, too. I think we all do. Some people grow up knowing exactly what they believe, and others spend their whole lives searching for the truth. But I can tell you this: God is real, and he does love us." The boy's eyes widened slightly, as if absorbing the weight of the words. Trump continued, his tone growing softer. "I've been in some very tough situations in my life. I've seen great victories, and I've seen tough losses. I've had moments where I felt on top of the world, and moments where I wondered if I could go on. But through it all, there was one thing I always felt deep down, and that's God's presence." The crowd was silent now, hanging on to every word. Some people nodded, others seemed lost in thought. "You see," Trump said, "life is not always easy. There are times when you feel alone, times when you think no one understands what you're going through. But I promise you, God is always there. Even in the hardest times, even when things don't make sense, he's there." A woman in the front row wiped away a tear. A man near the back whispered, "Wow," under his breath. "But here's something really important," Trump continued, looking directly at the boy. "God's love isn't just for the powerful. It's not just for the rich or the famous. It's for everyone. It's for you, for me, for the people in this room, and for the people outside who may never even hear this message. God doesn't see us the way the world does. He doesn't care about how much money we have or what kind of job we do. He cares about our hearts." The boy nodded, holding on to every word. Trump leaned back slightly, pausing for a moment as if recalling something personal. Then he said, "I remember a time when I was much younger, before I ever got into politics, before I had the businesses I have today. There was a moment when I felt completely lost. Things weren't going the way I planned. I had worked hard, but things were falling apart. And in that moment, I turned to God. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew he did." A hush filled the room. Even those who weren't particularly religious seemed moved. "And do you know what happened?" Trump asked, looking at the boy. "God didn't give me a quick fix. He didn't just snap his fingers and make everything perfect, but he gave me strength, he gave me wisdom, and most importantly, he gave me peace. The kind of peace you can't get from money or success. The kind of peace that stays with you even when things are hard." The boy smiled slightly. His question had been answered in a way he hadn't expected. Trump's voice grew even softer. "And I want you to know something very important. God has a plan for you. He has a plan for all of us. Sometimes we don't understand it. Sometimes it takes longer than we want. But he never makes mistakes. Every challenge, every obstacle, it's all part of something bigger." The applause gradually faded, but the atmosphere in the room remained thick with emotion. It was one of those rare moments where people from all walks of life, Supporters, critics, young, old, found themselves united, if only for a few minutes, by something greater than politics. Trump looked around the room, taking in the expressions on people's faces. He could see the impact his words had made. He wasn't reading from a teleprompter. He wasn't delivering a campaign speech. This was something different. It was real. The young boy was still standing there, holding the microphone, his eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and awe. He hadn't expected such a profound answer. Maybe he had expected something shorter, something simple. But what he received was something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Trump smiled at him again, then turned back to the audience. "You know," he said, "it's questions like that that remind us what really matters. In the world we live in, we get so caught up in the noise. The news, social media, the arguments, the divisions. But at the end of the day, the most important thing isn't who wins an election or who has the biggest bank account. It's our faith, our families, and how we treat each other." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded, others clapped softly. "And I'll tell you something," he continued, his voice steady but full of conviction. "I've traveled all over this country. I've met incredible people. Hard-working men and women who love their country, who love their families, who wake up every day and give their best. And you know what I see in them? Faith. I see faith even in the toughest of times." He paused for a moment, scanning the audience. "I've met parents who've lost their jobs but still believe that tomorrow will be better. I've met soldiers who've risked everything for our country because they believe in something bigger than themselves. I've met people who have been through the hardest struggles you can imagine, illness, loss, failure, and yet they still hold on to faith. They still believe in God's plan." A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes again. A man nearby whispered to his wife, "This is something special." Trump nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the emotions filling the room. "Faith is what keeps us going," he said. "Faith is what gives us strength when we don't have any left. And I'll tell you this, we are a nation that was built on faith. This country didn't become great by accident. It became great because of the people who believed in God, believed in freedom, believed in the idea that anything is possible if you work hard and trust in something greater than yourself." The crowd erupted into applause again, louder, this time. It wasn't the kind of applause that came from hearing a politician say something they wanted to hear. It was deeper. It was real. Trump let the applause settle before continuing. "Now I know there are people out there who try to push faith aside. They say it doesn't belong in public life, that it should be kept private. But let me tell you something. Faith is not something we hide. Faith is something we live by. It's what gives us hope. It's what gives us purpose." He turned back to the young boy, who was still watching him intently. "And that's why your question was so important," he said, "because it reminds us to stop and think about what truly matters. So thank you for asking it." The boy beamed, his face lighting up with pride. The crowd applauded again, this time specifically for the young boy. His parents, standing nearby, had tears in their eyes. Trump glanced out at the audience once more. "I know some of you might be going through difficult times," he said. "Maybe you've lost someone you love. Maybe you're struggling financially. Maybe you're dealing with something no one else even knows about. But I want you to remember this. God sees you. He knows your struggles, and He has not forgotten you." Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom, but the kind that comes from people absorbing something deep, something real. Trump's voice softened. "There have been times in my own life when I've wondered, why is this happening? Why now? And in those moments, I've realized that even when I don't have all the answers, God does. Even when things don't make sense, He is still in control." A man in the front row, a veteran with a military cap on, gave a firm nod. Others in the room wiped their eyes, clearly moved by the words. As the cheers and applause filled the room, the young boy sat back down, still holding on to the weight of what had just happened. His parents placed their hands on his shoulders, beaming with pride, while those around him gave him nods and smiles of encouragement. He wasn't just a kid anymore, not in that moment. He had asked a question that had touched hearts, that had reminded people of something greater than politics, greater than success, greater than anything the world could offer. Trump, now sitting back in his chair, let out a deep breath as if reflecting on the power of the moment himself. He glanced toward his team, who were also visibly moved. Even those who had been focused on logistics and timing, the event planners, the security personnel, the staff members, seemed to recognize that something rare had just taken place. This wasn't just another speech. It wasn't just another Q&A session. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered humanity. The room, though still buzzing with emotion, slowly settled down. But the feeling of unity lingered, as if for a brief moment everyone had stepped away from the chaos of the world and into something deeper. Then, unexpectedly, a man in the audience stood up. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s or early 70s, with a weathered face that spoke of a life filled with both hardships and wisdom. He didn't have a microphone, but his voice was strong. "Mr. President," he said, his voice slightly shaky with emotion, "I just want to say thank you. Thank you for answering that boy's question the way you did. I lost my wife last year, and it's been the hardest time of my life. But hearing what you just said, it reminded me that God hasn't forgotten me, that I'm not alone. And I just wanted to thank you." The room, once again, fell into a respectful silence. The man's words carried the kind of weight that only comes from real pain, real struggle. Trump looked at him, and for a moment, it was clear that he wasn't just a politician on a stage. He was a human being, connecting with another human being in a way that transcended titles and positions. He stood up, stepped toward the edge of the stage, and spoke directly to the man. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "Losing someone you love is one of the hardest things in life, and I won't pretend that words can take away that pain. But I do believe this. Your wife is still with you. Not just in your memories, not just in your heart, but in a way that's beyond what we can see. And I believe with all my heart that one day, you'll see her again." The older man nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. But there was also something else in them, hope. Trump continued, his voice steady. "I've met so many people who have faced loss, who have been through the kind of pain that makes you question everything, and I've seen something incredible in them. Resilience, strength, and most of all, faith, and I see that in you too." The man wiped his eyes, and then, to everyone's surprise, he placed his hand over his heart and said, "God bless you, Mr. President." The crowd erupted again, but this time, it wasn't just applause. It was something deeper. People weren't just clapping because of politics or admiration. They were clapping because they had witnessed something real, something that reminded them of the best parts of humanity. Trump nodded, visibly moved. "God bless you too," he said, "and God bless everyone in this room." He stepped back toward his seat, but before he sat down, he turned to the crowd once more. "Moments like this," he said, "are why I believe in this country. Not because of politics, not because of policies, but because of the people. Because of the faith that keeps us going, even when things get hard." The audience responded with another wave of applause, and this time it wasn't just an end to a speech. It was a recognition of a shared experience. As the event moved forward, people turned to one another, sharing their own stories, their own experiences of faith, loss, and resilience. The young boy, now sitting with his parents, looked around and realized that his simple question had sparked something much bigger than he ever could have imagined. Later that evening, as the event concluded and people began to leave, conversations lingered. Some people exchanged contact information, eager to stay connected with those they had met. Others left the venue in deep thought, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. And Trump, as he walked off the stage and toward his team, seemed to take one last look at the crowd as